Some of the big challenges that we're seeing, not only when we talk to families about cost and the perception, but you know that the FAFSA has changed from the output, the results of the FAFSA now is not called the EFC, the expected family contribution. It's called the SAI, Student Aid Index. And when I started out at DePaul University 40 years ago, it was the results of the what was the FAFSA back then. It was called something else, but what the FAFSA was, the output was called a Pell Grant Index. Then a couple of years later was changed to Student Aid Index. And then a couple of years later, for the last 30 years, it's been called the Expected Family Contribution. But it's interesting that it's going back to the SAI, to the Student Aid Index, because that's truly what it is. It's not a dollar amount, and colleges have used it as a dollar amount and will still use it as kind of a dollar amount. But really, it's just meant to calculate eligibility for the federal Pell Grant and for Illinois, the MAP grant, from Illinois. Because the FAFSA is overhauled hugely for this coming year, they're delaying the opening of the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators is on top of this, and they are holding the Department of Ed their feet to the fire and making sure that it's when it does open, it's going to open well. There'll be no bugs, and families should have a much easier time of completing it. Enhancements to the FAFSA. I mean, this is a couple years old, but selective service was removed. Thank God, because we have been lobbying for that for years. And so for the 23-24 school year, yeah, it was still asked for on the FAFSA, but not taken into consideration at all. So male students do no longer need to register for selective service. Students who were convicted of drug offenses, no longer that is taken into consideration. Those questions do not even show up on the 24-25 FAFSA anymore. It took a while to get them off of the FAFSA. What's optional on the new FAFSA now is gender and ethnicity, which some colleges have scholarships specifically not for ethnic groups, but for males and females. I mean, there are still colleges out there that have gender specific scholarships, but we're no longer getting that information off of the FAFSA. We can, if the students answer those questions, but it's optional. It won't prevent the FAFSA being processed. It won't negate any kind of information that we get. Another huge enhancement, and it's kind of a retooling of something that has been used in the past, where the income information on the FAFSA can be brought directly in from the IRS website. In the past, it was kind of a back end approach where the families said, yes, I want to use what's called the data retrieval tool. They would then link over to the IRS site, plug in a whole bunch of their information, transfer that information back into the FAFSA, and then continue with the FAFSA. Now it's an upfront feature. It's like you must say, yes, I agree to use the data from the IRS website. If a student or a parent does not agree to that, the FAFSA does not get processed. It just stops, cold. Nothing happens to it at all. Um, Not that I have a lot of pet peeves, but I'm just, I have some. It's called a direct data exchange, DDX, but exchange starts with an E. Why is it not called DDE? That question was asked at a financial aid conference, and the response was, well, DDX just sounds so much stronger than DDE. DDE just kind of does not roll off the tongue very well, but the DDX is the feature that families will now start using. And then Pell Grant, the formula is kind of changing. It's changing on the front end for some of the lower income families, but not for the upper income families. The very first thing Pell Grant will look at is income, a family's income compared to the poverty level. And I've got an example I'll show you in just a second. So initially, if a family their income is less than 225% of the poverty level, they automatically get the maximum Pell. That wasn't the case before. It was still kind of go through the formula, and they may get the maximum Pell, they may not. Probably they would. What's going to happen is that more families will qualify for Pell, and more families will qualify for higher Pell amounts, which is really what we want to do, which is why we want to get those families who stopped, completing the FAFSA because it was very burdensome, or thought, I just can't afford a school. hopefully we'll bring those kids into the mix, and it'll be a lot more favorable, a lot more affordable for them. The shift in the Pell Grant, we will see more Pell Grant recipients overall. We will see some families lose Pell Grant, but those will be the upper income families. And the number in college that used to be reported on the FAFSA has been taken out of the equation initially, and I'll get to that in a second. So the SAI is just going to be based on a family size and their income, not divided by the number in college anymore.
Manny asked about how undocumented families would work through the FAFSA. And I know.
So in order to do the FAFSA, in order to complete it, the student and a parent both need a federal student aid ID. It just is required. Undocumented parents can now get a federal student aid ID, even if they do not have a social security number. They'll still be able to get, with other identifying information, a federal student aid ID. If undocumented families have an ITIN, if they did file a tax return, they do have a taxpayer ID number, that's what's going to be used to bring the tax information into the FAFSA. But they will not be prevented. They will not have to sign the FAFSA manually or with a wet signature. A family of four who's, the poverty level for a family of four is $27,000. Multiply that by 225%. A family could earn up to $62,000 and automatically get the maximum Pell Grant. Even above that, they will get some Pell Grant. And then it gets a little, it's generous, a little confusing, but there will be some people who initially don't qualify for Pell, who are just on the fence, but they will be given a Pell Grant, kind of a parting gift Pell Grant. They will still get $600 in Pell. One of the things that has happened because the FAFSA is delayed and we do not have the federal formula is that the net price calculators on colleges' websites, which I always refer to as net cost calculator, because that's truly what it is, what's going to cost the family. It's always been, based on your information at our particular college. These are going to be delayed until at least the middle of December. So in place of a net cost calculator, it doesn't do everything, but the federal government has this new federal student aid estimator. So at this website, families can put in their demographic, their identifying and financial information, and they will get their student aid index, and it will tell them what they might, qualify, what they might be eligible to receive. I tried it the other day just to see, and it's not bad. And it does tell the student what their Pell Grant eligibility is, what their student loan eligibility is. It also tells them what their work study eligibility is, which is very curious because not every college gets the same amount of work study to offer its students. So I kind of hope they take that out of the equation. Otherwise, if a student is not offered work study, they may come back to a college saying, why didn't I get it? But here comes some screenshots that, some of these I'm going to try to go through quickly, but here's the new landing page, which kind of looks like the old landing page, still the same kind of blue boxes, start a new form or edit an existing form. Students must have a federal student aid ID before they log into the FAFSA now. No longer can they start by putting some of their identifying information in the FAFSA, name and social security number and date of birth. They must enter the FAFSA with their FSA ID. Here's the page they'll see. They'll start as a student. The next 4 pages I really like because it gives them very quickly, like less than a 2-minute video here of why are you even filling out the FAFSA? A little overview, what we're going to ask for it. Who is a contributor to the FAFSA? It's still referred to as student and parents, but now anybody whose information is on the FAFSA is considered a contributor. So how to invite them, how to be part of this process, what to expect, how long will it take? It says here in this example that it's going to take about an hour. I don't think it's going to take about an hour. From start to finish, maybe 45 minutes tops, but and then really nice, because this was never up front in the process, but kind of what happens next, like what happens after you fill out the FAFSA, how long does it take? What will, colleges will be in communication with you as to whether they've received it or not. When the student logs in, a lot of the information is pre-populated with their information that they used when they filled out the federal student aid ID. So their name, social security number, date of birth, address. They can still at this moment in time go in and change any of that if they want to, whether they can change their email address or their cell phone number if they think they made a mistake to it. So it's easy enough to change it even at this part in the process. If the student had income, then they must upfront in the process say, yes, I know income is going to be asked for on this application. I consent to the IRS pre-populating it for me, without me having to go back into the IRS website. The student will then indicate who's going to be a contributor. Do they have parents? Are the parents, separated? Are they divorced? Are they married? A little bit about their marital status. And then the student invites the parents to be part of the FAFSA process. So parents cannot start the FAFSA part until they get this invitation from FAFSA that the student has put in here. At this moment in time, it's the parent is probably hovering in back of the student because it's going to ask for parent information like social security number and email address. So parents probably will need to be there to say, this is what you should put in on here. Student selects the colleges. The number of colleges has been increased to 20 on the FAFSA, which is wonderful. And it was stuck at 10 for the last 30 years. Finally, it's gone up to 20. And then the student signs it. I don't see it on this little screenshot, but there's just a little box at the bottom where the student checks that box. And because they logged in with their FSA ID, they sign it electronically. It gets submitted. They get the student confirmation page, but that doesn't mean the FAFSA has been completed. In fact, it literally says you're almost there, not quite, you're halfway done. Now we need to get the parents to put their information in here. So the parents will get an email. They can link, there'll be a link in the email directly to the FAFSA, or they can just log into the FAFSA at studentaid.gov, themselves as a parent using their login information. Up front, the parent also needs to say, yes, I consent to having the IRS populate this. In either case, student or parent, if they do not provide consent, then again, the FAFSA is not processed. It just remains in limbo. Just a few demographics about the parents are asked, their marital status, just to confirm that, the number of students who will be in college, and their state of legal residence for state grant purposes. Parents will indicate their marital status. The other thing that happens automatically is the family size is automatically considered from the number of exemptions on the parent's tax return. Parents can go in at this point saying, no, that's not right. I mean, because this is coming from the 22 tax return, and we're at the end of 23. A student, they may have had a child born that wasn't on the tax return. They may have adopted. They may have other family members in the household. Here's where the families can override that and say, no, I had 3 exemptions, but really there are 2 other people living at home. In the case of divorced or separated families, the definition of who the FAFSA parent is the parent who gave the student the most support. It used to be, who did the student live with the most? Now it's just who gave the student more than 50% of their financial support. It's the parent's call, judgment call on their part. They get to decide, which parent is the parent of record on the FAFSA. Typical in divorce cases is one parent might claim the student as an exemption, but the student lives with the other parent and they're the parent of record. So again, at this point in time, that's where the family can go in and say, and clarify the family size. And then they will be asked the question, how many of the kids will be in college? We'll see that. And colleges can take that into consideration in a number of ways, but that will not be taken into consideration when generating that student aid index number. And then very, quickly, we'll just ask the parents, did you file a tax return? If you did, and you provided consent, we're bringing that right in. If you didn't file a tax return, why? Did you not have any income? Did you have any untaxed income? And then it'll shift them to the asset section. It used to be that if a parent receives some child support, that was considered income. Now it's considered an asset, which is a good thing because assets are diluted greatly before they're taken into consideration for the student aid index. So having child support under the parent assets along with other investments or savings that they might have, and I'll come back to the whole asset thing at the very end because there's some confusing information out there still that needs to be resolved as to what's considered an asset or not. And then the parents sign it because they logged in with their own federal student aid ID. They'll click that box at the bottom. They will sign it and they'll get the confirmation page that says now the FAFSA is absolutely complete. The student will get sent an email. The student will be notified of the processing time. The colleges will then get that information. That we'll be able to download that information if they included our college on there, our FAFSA code, and that will start the communication flow as to kind of next steps. What happens after that. Colleges are now required. It was strongly encouraged for colleges to take any special circumstances into account. Now the colleges are being told, if a family presents any special circumstances to you, you must take that into consideration. How they do is still going to be subjective from college to college, from university to university, but they will recognize any of these buckets, any of the other buckets of special circumstances that a family has, whether it's what they're paying for secondary school tuition for other siblings, or healthcare costs, or a separation, or all sorts of different things that colleges can take into consideration, including, and here is where the number in college falls into an appeal, kind of a special circumstance. So colleges can take that into consideration at that point in time. Kind of a student loan update. So that's enough about FAFSA. We'll come back to a couple of things, because I want to be aware of our time. Student loan update. So Congress didn't like the forgiveness program that President Biden proposed. So U.S. Department of Education is doing kind of an end around, quite honestly, saying, okay, fine. Now we're coming up with a new repayment plan. So what replaced the income-driven plan called Repay is now called Save, which is wonderful. It also bases the borrower's income on poverty level, takes a much lower percentage of their income. If they make their payment and the interest is accruing that month because they didn't make enough to pay the interest is forgiven, that month. So there's no accrued interest going forward. And if a student is married but doesn't want their spouse's income taken into consideration, that's fine, but they need to file, separate tax returns, so that's not taken into consideration. What's going to happen next, or before we get to that, here's kind of a estimated monthly payment plan. Again, based on the poverty level, a student making, here, I'm going to go right to the example. Alexander, making $38,000 a year. Under the former repayment plan, the income driven, which was the Repay, Alexander was paying $134 a month. Under this new plan, he's paying $43 a month. So 1/3 of what he was paying, before. There are new benefits that are going to come out next year with the SAVE plan. It's going to go down even further, from 10% of discretionary income down to 5%. Student loan forgiveness will happen as soon as 10 years as opposed to 20 years or 15 years. Now, if students keep making whatever payments they're required to make based on the SAVE plan, after 10 years, the rest is forgiven. In the past, when students consolidated their loans, it's kind of like they started all over, which was crazy. So consolidating loans or consolidated loans in the past do not affect these payments toward loan forgiveness. Going into forbearance or deferment, those payments that they would have made, but they don't have to, are still counted toward their total payments. If they miss a payment, they'll automatically be enrolled. A lot is being done to make sure that, honestly, it's because the student loan forgiveness of $20,000 was poo-pooed by Congress. So the Department of Ed is saying, fine, we'll go this way. Ultimately, students will see some benefit, because of this. There's some great resources out there that I still use, and I recommend that you guys look at as well. And what fascinates me is that third bullet point, trends in college pricing and student aid. It's published by the College Board. One of the things that they publish in a recent article, we're talking about student loans. Student loan indebtedness has actually gone down. 43% of all the student loan borrowers out there have less than $10,000 in student loan indebtedness. The higher amounts that we see are all the students going to medical school or law school or professional school or a couple different master's degrees. I like the financial aid toolkits that's done by the U.S. Department of Education. There's some good resources in there.